click on property rentals, and then go into Landlord Forum, or if you just Google Redbridge Landlord Forum. We also ask you to leave your camera on if you wish, so that we can all see one another. And just to let you know, as I mentioned, we won't actually have any questions during the presentations, but we will allow for questions at the end of each presentation. And just raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. You can also ask a question by going into the chat function and asking there. So that's another way of doing that if you'd like to. Now, we may not get through all of the questions, and indeed, if some of the questions are quite personal to you, or require a sort of longer, more involved answer, then I may ask you to email prslicensing@redbridge.gov.uk, and one of my colleagues at Redbridge Council will come back to you or point you in the right direction. And obviously, we do want everyone to be courteous and behave well. I'm sure you will, but I just wanted to mention that Teams is different in that we can all get involved. That doesn't mean you can behave badly as well. But if you do behave really badly, then we may have to ask you to leave, or we may need to take you out of the meeting. But I'm sure that won't happen, because I'm expecting you all to behave very well indeed. So before we get stuck in, let me just now go on to tonight's agenda. So we're going to be starting with a presentation from Shmal Ali, who's Housing Standards Manager, and Cheryl Hart, who is the Private Licensing Processing Manager. And they're going to give us an update on licensing and enforcement in Redbridge. That will be followed by a presentation from Josie Falco, who is Operations Director in Civic Pride. And she's going to be talking about untidy front gardens and other street scene issues. We will then have a panel discussion, and that's going to be about investing in property for retirement tonight. And I'm pleased that we're going to have Mary-Ann Richmond-Coggan and Sue Breyer joining us. They're portfolio landlords, and they'll be talking to us about their investment strategies, how they have invested in property, bearing in mind how they want to retire. And also we'll be getting some tips on sort of tax strategies as well, although there won't be any specific tax advice, but there'll be some pointers for you to go away and research. We will then hear from Karen Shaw, who's Head of Housing Needs, on developing an approach to prevention and early intervention in homelessness. And we will finish off with a regulatory briefing from me, and also just a pointer on what's happening with the housing market and where I think things are heading. So without further ado, I shall come out of my presentation and invite our first speakers, Shmal Ali and Cheryl Hart, who are going to give us a licensing and enforcement update. So I hand over to you.
Good evening, everybody. Cheryl speaking here, Property Licensing Manager for Redbridge. Just going to give you an overview of where we're at with property licensing at the moment. I just want to tell you what we've achieved so far, the past activity, how many licenses to date, etc., and where we're at with those. Present work we're doing, and the future planned work. So first of all, with the licenses we've received over the last, since 2018, 17,772 selective licenses for single households. We did have a very big backlog because of the number of licenses that came in the beginning, and the staffing was phased in as income came in, because it's a self-funding process. So I'm glad to say that the backlog we've got on top of now 95% of all selective licenses have been issued, and I'm confident that the remaining, we've got 942 to go, they should be done in the next few weeks, subject to people paying their second payments. We're still getting selective licenses in quite regularly. Obviously not the number of licenses we had at the very beginning of the scheme, because the schemes, selective scheme 1 started in 2017 and selective scheme 2 started in 2018. So those first few months we were getting vast numbers in, sort of 4,000 in 1 month at one stage. Now we're getting sort of maybe 100, 150 licenses in a month. So it's still quite a steady stream of selective licenses coming in. HMOs, we've got additional and mandatory HMOs, additional being the small HMOs, 3 to 4 people. forming 2 or more households, and then we've got the mandatories, which are the large ones, which are 5 or more people forming 2 or more households. Currently, we've received 500 additional and 815 mandatory. And as you can see on that chart, we're around about the 87%, 85% of those have been completed. The ones that are still in the system being processed, different things, different stages, but at the moment, one of the enforcement seniors is going through some of the more complicated ones where there's visits and there's different things having to be sorted out regarding if something's had an illegal conversion and that. So sometimes they do take a bit longer, but hopefully we'll get all those HMOs all finalised very soon in the next month or so. So it's looking much better than it did, thank goodness. And if anybody has any long delays, please don't hesitate to email me or the PRS licensing email address. So we'll bring that up at the end. And we can always look into any specific queries you might have about a license if you're waiting for it.
Sorry, Cheryl, is it possible that you can share your screen because it's not coming up?
Is it not coming up?
No.
Let's do it again.
Okay, so we have a slight technical hitch, I think. And oh, here we go. It looks like
got it.
Getting it now.
Got
yes,
it?
there it is.
It?
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Thank
I'll bring
you.
That back.
Yes.
Let me bring that back. Okay. I don't know if it was when I put it on slideshow it disappeared. I don't know. A minute. Get rid of that. Can you see that? Is that okay?
Yes, that's all good.
Yep,
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
That's great.
Right.
Thank you.
So basically, the figures I've just read you through are those. So basically, very quickly, selective, we've issued 95% of the ones we've received. Additional, we've issued 87% of the ones we've received. And mandatory, we've issued 85% of the ones we received. If anybody's got anything they need to ask, any questions, we can always email us and we will get back to you to let you know whereabouts we are in the process if you've got a license you've been waiting for. Income in the last 12 months, you can see this period here, March, April, May of this year. That's when we had a lot of selective licenses that we completed. That was where the backlog was basically conquered as far as the selective licenses was concerned. So the income obviously went up then because we had a lot of balances paid. As you can see now, July, August, September, it's plateauing now. We're getting a steady stream of licenses, so the income is a steady stream, but it's not obviously as high as it was when we had the peaks of the large amounts applying at the very beginning of the schemes. Current activity, processing team now, because we haven't got so many licenses coming in, the processing team are doing more proactive work. We're looking at different applications that people have started and haven't completed. So we're going to be getting in touch with people who've started applications and never followed through. We're proactively going to be writing to properties in the borough where we've identified properties that look like they are possible rentals and haven't applied for a license. So there will be some activity with letters going out in the next few months to properties that we've got from different data analytics, such as looking at things like housing benefits and how many people are council tax and that sort of thing. There's a lot of data that basically can suggest to us what properties are more likely to be rentals than home owner occupiers. We're trying to turn around all new applications within 3 months. The only ones that might take longer than that is if it's a complicated HMO, but the turnaround of a license application should be much quicker from now on. And also some of my staff are helping with the administration of fixed penalty notices with the enforcement team issue, and also the Hmos work, which is to do with the minimum energy performance of properties, but Shamal will be talking about that more in a minute. Future activity, we've done an internal sort of licensing review, which went to our cabinet in September, and received approval to consult on the renewal of the current additional licensing and selective licensing schemes. one thing to point out, when additional licensing originally came out in 2017, the definition of a mandatory HMO had to have 3 floors or more, and anything less than that was an additional. So back in 2017, you could, in theory, have an additional license, which could have maybe 10 people or 5 households, as long as it only had 2 floors or less. 1st of October 18, that definition changed. So a lot of additional licenses, which are going to be expiring soon, will actually, when they have to renew, will be mandatory licenses, because if they've got 5 or more people forming 2 or more households, they won't be able to have an additional license anymore. It will be a mandatory license because of the definition which changed in 1st of October 2018. So with the additionals, we're going to be doing a 12-week public consultation, which we hope to get launched before the end of the year. And we will be able to actually present to you in the next Landlord Forum, which I think Misha's hoping to do sort of beginning of December. With the additional HMO licensing, we don't have to go to Secretary of State. We just have to have a consultation and obviously look at the evidence, what was produced about how successful the schemes have been. The current additional HMO licensing scheme is due to expire 12th of April 22. So we're hoping that the new scheme will commence something like the 1st of May 2022. But there will be a 12-week consultation online, in the local press, and at the Landlord Forum, next Landlord Forum, to give everybody a chance to put their points of view and any queries over to us and comments. The selective licensing renewal scheme, that's a little bit different. It will be another 12-week public consultation. But with this one, we've got to, once we've had a public consultation, which we anticipate will be sometime this spring, summer of 2022, we then have to send off comments and evidence and everything and put a case together to put before the Secretary of State. And then we have to seek the approval of the Secretary of State to see if we can renew our selective licensing scheme. So that one is a decision which is out of our hands. It's whether the Secretary of State agrees it or not. So that's where we're at. So a lot of things going on. So we're more of a proactive role now. And as I say, if anybody's got any queries about any specific licenses, please feel free to email prs.licensing@redbridge.gov.uk, and we'll be happy to get back to you and give you an update on where we are with your particular file. That's it from me. Over to Shamal.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to try and share my presentation. If I can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yes, it's up now. Great, Shamal. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. Good evening, everyone. I'm Shamal Ali. I'm the Housing Standards Team Manager at Redbridge. I'll go straight into this because I don't have long. I think I've got 7 minutes to read through my slides. I'm going to talk to you about licensing review update, a cabinet report that was approved recently. Cheryl touched upon it in her slide. And then I'll give you an update on the housing enforcement action that's been taken over the last few months and last year. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about the Redbridge Action Zone. My team undertook a project and inspected or visited nearly 4,000 properties in the month of August. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about the NEES, the minimum energy efficiency standards. So, as I said,
well, sorry to interrupt. Would you be able to go into slideshow just because it makes the slide a bit bigger and easier to read?
Okay,
I think.
Try.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes, that's lovely. Thanks.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so as part of the licensing legislation, councils that operate licensing schemes are required to undertake a review of the schemes. So recently we actually did that, and we undertook the review. The review, without going into too much detail, because the report can actually be accessed by the details on my last slide. There's a link on there, that takes you to the full report that was approved by Cabinet on the 14th of September. The achievements so far since 2017, from the start of the Selective Licensing Scheme 1, that the team completed and issued 18,932 licenses, including HMO, so that's selective licenses and HMO licenses. The team undertook over 12,000 inspections, served over 3,000 enforcement notices, issued 527 financial penalty notices, 50 prosecutions, and actually abated 1,485 Category 1 and 2 hazards. Just two charts here to give you an idea of the enforcement visits. We've, as you can see, very heavily impacted by COVID, the pandemic. The government put a suspension on proactive inspections. So the team were then diverted to carry out compliance, HMO compliance work, because HMOs are regarded higher risk properties. So we worked on the very serious cases. Officers were going out using PPE, and other cases where we could do virtual inspections or communicate with tenants within the HMOs. We were able to communicate via mobile phones, via emails, via the internet, and virtual communication, i.e. videos, sent in to officers that highlight issues within these properties. The peak you can see in August are the visits that were undertaken by the housing enforcement team. I'll talk about it a bit. I've got a slide on the Redbridge Action Zone in a couple, I think it's the next slide, but the team actually undertook nearly 4,000 visits in the Ilford town area. So that's the Redbridge Action Zone, and I'll be talking about it next. The team served 479 enforcement notices in the last year. Again, this has been impacted by COVID. Redbridge Action Zone, nearly 4,000 visits undertaken in this area. I'm not sure if many of you, read the publicity on Redbridge Action Week. It was a corporate drive by the whole of Civic Pride, various partners internally and externally. We participated, the housing enforcement team, in ensuring that enforcement officers and enforcement departments were out to deal with any enforcement issues within the whole borough. That was early August. That was very successful, and then we were asked to, as the housing enforcement team, this area was highlighted by various partners, high reportings of crime, antisocial behaviour by the police, residents and members. So we took on this project. I put all my resources together, 15 enforcement officers, bearing in mind we previously had 24 enforcement officers. We've lost 10 enforcement officers in the last year. So 15 enforcement officers were drafted. They visited nearly 4,000 premises, and we have the outcome from that was staggering. I mean, we identified 397 potential unlicensed rented properties, which we will be investigating. We're working on that as we speak. We identified that 97 licensed properties could potentially have some breaches, and we will be undertaking further investigations on those. We were not able to access around 1,500 properties, and those are also being followed up at the moment. Move on to minimum energy efficiency standards. This is more like a fact sheet. I won't go through this slide word by word, but we've put a slide together to tell you what is Hmos. I mean, Hmos was introduced in 2018, and the remaining provisions, it came into force this year, April this year. It was delayed due to the pandemic. The Domestic Minimum Energy Efficiency Standards regulation sets a minimum energy efficiency level for domestic private rented properties. The type of properties that this regulation affects are domestic private rented properties, so not HMOs. If your property is rented or tenanted under an assured regulated tenancy, and has been on the market for sale or let or modified in the past 10 years, then you will have to look at these regulations because it will affect you. Properties with poor energy efficiency is likely to have, or that it's likely to have defects of excess cold and damp and mold will be affected. The regulations apply to all properties that are currently occupied by existing tenants. Some are exempt, for example, RSLs. Landlords must ensure that the properties comply with the EPC report recommendations detailing measures which should improve the energy efficiency of their property to a minimum band E or higher if they want to continue to let. The provisions by this regulations allows the local authority to take further enforcement action if landlords do not comply. Now, the full link to the regulations and exemptions is on my last slide. A cap of £3,500 is set as a minimum an amount landlord is required to spend on energy improvement works. Where a landlord is unable to improve a property EPC to E or higher within this cap, then they must register for an exemption, and the link is on the last slide. Again, this slide details what will happen, what action the local authority can take in terms of enforcement. We can issue you with a compliance notice if you fail to send in the documents that we request. We can also issue or serve penalty notices. Your details could go on the register, the Rogue Landlords Register. You could receive a financial penalty and also be published. And so we would encourage landlords to read upon the legislation, get ahead of the legislation and ensure that you comply with the legislation. The exemptions link is here, the legislation link is here. And earlier on I talked about the Cabinet report for the selective licensing review. That link is here. The lead officer for Hmos is Elise Bote. This is her details. If you have any further questions on Hmos legislation or the exemptions or enforcement, please do not hesitate to contact us. Anything relating to any of the queries on my slides, you can contact me directly. My email address is there, or alternatively, you can email housing.standards@redbridge.gov.uk. Thank you.
Thanks, Shmol. We've got a question actually from Jay, who was asking, do all council properties have to adhere to the same standards? I think that's on Hmos, and also why are RSLs not subject to the same rules?
It's just privately rented. This regulation is directed at privately rented properties, so no council properties are exempt.
And that's simply a question of government policy, isn't it? That Hmos is purely directed at the private rented sector. And I'll be talking in my presentation about how we'll be expected to get up to EPC C by 2025 for new tenancies, and by 2028 for existing tenancies. And that's going to be a real challenge for a lot of Victorian properties. But We don't know the result of the government consultation on that yet, but we should be hearing later this year. Okay, thank you very much for that, Shmol and Cheryl. I'm just looking to see if we've got any more questions, and we don't seem to have any at the moment. So I think what we will do is go straight on to our next presentation, which is from Josie Falco, who is Operational Director for Civic Pride at Redbridge. And Josie's going to be talking about untidy front gardens and other street scene issues. So I'm fascinated to hear about this. Josie, I always try and make sure my front gardens are as tidy as possible, but I've got one very difficult hedge in Ilford that's causing me a lot of problems.
Bless you. I don't know, can everyone see what I'm putting on the screen? Can you see my presentation as yet?
Yes,
Not yet, Josie, no.
Good.
Let's see if I can, is it going to show? Talk amongst yourselves.
Oh, it looks like it's on its way.
Aha, lovely.
There we go. Yes, lovely.
Okay, so before I start the presentation proper, I wanted to say just a few things. The main one I wanted to say, first of all, is thank you to all the landlords for the massive cooperation we've had with the wheel bin rollout, which is obviously one of the street issues that we've had within the borough for quite some time. You know, Redbridge was the 5th highest producer of refuse in England and one of the lowest recycling performers. So, you know, we were behind in a lot of the targets. So introducing wheelie bins was a big thing for us. Massive task. Because of the licensing scheme and the really close working that we were doing with the PRS team, you know, we were rolling out individual sort of HMA solutions as we were doing the actual sort of rollout. There'll still be issues to embed, but I just wanted to thank everyone and the landlords for the patience while we've done that. And the results are positive. With the month of July, we've seen the highest recorded recycling rate that Redbridge has ever had. So we'll look to see what the total is for the year. But thank you so much for everyone for your cooperation and your patience while we were doing that. So greatly appreciated. What I wanted to do today was sort of talk to you about a few things that really have come out. I'm really sorry guys, but I'm gonna say the COVID words, and it's some of the sort of the trends that you guys may need to know about in terms of tenant management that we're seeing through street scene issues across all housing types following sort of post-COVID. So bear with me. So these are some of the sort of stats that we saw during the COVID period for various different ASB and street scene issues. Fly tipping saw a massive hike during the COVID period, and it's still extremely high. It hasn't gone back down to pre-COVID. But the big one, which I think is probably sort of going to cause problems for most, or may cause ongoing issues for landlords, is the massive increase in noise ASB that has been reported. So the graph on the right at the top here, the ASB calls received, this shows you, this orange line is effectively how noise nuisance and reports of noise nuisance came in through the COVID period. This is the blue line is pre-COVID. So neighbour on neighbour fed upness or lack of patience in terms of noise went through the ceiling, and it's not come back down to pre-COVID levels. So the tolerance of noise is now slightly lower than it was pre-COVID. So where you've got density of tenants, really I think that's something to be mindful in terms of neighbours and issues, because there's an awful lot of reports coming through. Those sort of trends, I wanted to, treat street scene enforcement, untidy front gardens also increased because obviously people were in their own homes or in their tenancies. And this is I think quite shocking in terms, but this is a national trend. This shows the fly tipping and the sort of the street scene ASB trend through this period as well. The white line at the bottom is the pre-COVID, the green line is during COVID, and this is how we're tracking at the minute. So to give you how this sort of works out year on year, We are, pre-COVID, we sort of probably saw about 90,000 street scene issues reported to the Civic Pride team. We're currently looking that we're going to be looking at about 120,000 this year, so massive increase. So I think there's something to say here in terms of a little bit of a heads up that this is maybe an issue that in terms of tenancy agreements and those sort of things might be be a bit more mindful of. One of the things that we're going to be doing, because this is one of the things that has been brought up through this period, is that because more people are at home, there is a massive issue with untidy front gardens. So we're going to be doing quite a lot this year around tackling untidy front gardens. This is across, again, I stress here, this is across all housing types, but I thought it would be very useful to come here and to tell you what's going on, because obviously it's all part of that responsible landlord and tenancy management. We are going to be looking at, there's other things that we're looking at that we're focusing on. Begging, needy and greedy campaign is out there. Noise we will be focusing on, but this is one that we will be focusing on by the neighbourhoods enforcement team. So this is around, we'll be using the legislation of the Antisocial Behaviour and Policing Act. And what we will be doing is we will be trying to engage, educate and enforce. We're not going to go in there and, we've tried to come up with a procedure that builds in a little bit of time for people to resolve issues before we go in with fines and penalties. But it's very much aimed at trying to improve the street scene. And I obviously will share this when we come back. So the sort of things that, I've got quite a few, I'm peppering this with slides: overgrown hedges, loose waste, rusty cars, anything that is detrimental to the look of a property can be deemed to be an untidy front garden. We are seeing an increase of it, particularly where lots of people have got, building works going on, and this is obviously a problem. We wouldn't be using this process for empty properties. That would still come under the Town and Planning, Country Planning Act, but this is for particularly where we've got people residing in properties. What we will be doing, the first thing that we will be doing is putting effectively an enforcement sticker on those items that we see that are in a garden that we deem to be causing it to be unattractive, let's say. The reason we're doing this is for two reasons, really. First of all, is to make sure that those looking at those gardens, people, neighbours and various other things, can see that we're taking action. The bright sticker informs that we're acting on it. It also prevents duplicate reports. We're getting so many duplicate reports, so that that we need to sort of just show that we are tackling this issue. Along with this, the enforcement team will be knocking on the door and trying to engage with the residents and the tenants. There'll be a letter that's issued to inform the occupants that the front garden needs attendance, and each property that is knocked on, we will try to get some, educate them on the services that are available to clear the untidy mess, and we will start the community protection notice process, which will be, this is how we will be doing this. We'll explain that we've got evidence, and that we will be pursuing it if the area is not cleared. So what will the officers do? So they'll identify that there's an untidy front garden. They'll begin the community protection process by serving a warning letter and attaching the warning sticker that I've shown you to the offending waste. They'll be talking to the owner, the tenant, the public of the enforcement action, that and we will basically say this is having a detrimental effect. You need to remove it. The aim is we're trying to engage here to say and give a bit of time. We will encourage the tenants to clear the waste, and there will be sort of we will also be posting the letter if we can't actually get engagement at the time and tracking that. So there'll be within the warning instruction, the person that we talk to, or the person responsible has 10 days effectively to clear the waste. Officers will collate information. If the community protection notice isn't actioned within the 10 days, there'll be a following notice that says you have a further 7 days to comply. So in total, there's like 17 days to comply. And then at that point, if we don't get any action, we will obviously go down a fixed penalty route. So we're hoping that this is going to resolve some of the issues. What we've found is that we've trialled it in the south of the borough, and we have had some really positive results. And I'm going to put one. I think there was a before and after. If I show you one screen again, which I'm not sure whether you can see on this bottom slide, this is effectively a before and after of what's been achieved, and this is without a fixed penalty notice actually being issued. So we've trialled this and it is working. The reason I wanted to obviously bring this to everyone's attention today is because as landlords, if we can't actually get the tenants to respond to these, it's for you to be aware that this is going on, because if someone gets one of these yellow stickers and gets a letter, they need to be onto you. They need to tell you the areas that you've got to be. What we're finding, having done and sorry if I'm overrunning here, the areas that we found that tenants, landlords are most vulnerable to, is effectively when appliances are broken and residents just put them outside and don't resolve it. And that's very much, you can use the bulky waste service. So please educate them for that. And then the other thing is obviously new tenants coming in. And the main thing is loads of mattresses, when people are coming in and they don't want to sleep on other person's mattresses. So it's really about educating tenants what to do in those circumstances.
I'm totally with you on this, Josie. And, I always speak to tenants at the beginning. On the day they move in, I do an induction with them. I tell them about the bulky waste service. I tell them that we don't dump things in the front garden. Whenever I replace an appliance, I get the appliance taken away at the same time as the new one's brought in, etc.
And thank you so much. And what I didn't want to do is start introducing this borough wide and not come through the forum to make everyone aware that this is going to be happening. So it's just pleased to be aware that this is going to start happening.
I think as a landlord, if I see that my tenant's front garden is untidy, then that's a cause for concern for me, because it suggests they're not looking after the property properly. Yeah. And I want to be a responsible landlord, and I want my garden to look one of the best on the street, and I'd encourage all other landlords to think in that way.
And this also obviously touches on waste management as well. The tenants should be helping you manage the waste that they're producing. We've got the curbside recycling scheme. I don't know how many of you have got, that recycling should be in your tenancy agreements. It's really about now sort of trying to push through all of that if you can.
And I would recommend to landlords using services like AO.com, who, will, if you get a new dishwasher or washing machine from them, they will take the old one away for a small fee, and it's, then it's job done and it's sorted. So.
And that was it, really. Any questions?
Thanks very much for that, Josie. I can't see any questions in the chat at the moment, but I think it's a sort of, seems like a niche issue, but actually you can tell which are the poorly managed properties by the poor condition of front gardens. And
I think the other thing is just to be aware of that horizon scanning in terms of trend of ASB noise nuisance. I think that's a big one for landlords as well, with multiple houses of multiple occupancy.
And I guess what we would ask there is that landlords are doing regular periodic inspections of properties, and also, I give my phone number to neighbours, and neighbours do call me if the tenants are having parties, and I soon find out, and then can address it with them. So I would recommend that to other landlords as well. I live next door to a very noisy, poorly managed, previously unlicensed HMO. It may well be getting licensed now though, and the noise has been terrible actually over the last few months. So I can concur with you about noise problems during lockdown. Yes, yeah.
So thank you everyone for listening. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Josie. That was great. So we'll see if any further questions come up later on, but we'll move on to our next item now. And I will share my screen again actually now. And oops, did that work? I'm not sure it did. Just sharing my screen. There we go. And we're now going to be looking at investing for retirement. And I want to welcome to the discussion Mary-Ann Richmond-Coggan, who is a portfolio landlord, and another portfolio landlord, Susan Briers. And so if I can introduce, are you both with us, Mary-Ann and Sue? Are you there? Oh, it sounds like you're not.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, you're there. Brilliant. That was that
Good
Sue?
evening.
That's Sue and Mary-Ann. Lovely. Great to hear from you. Thanks very much for joining us. And what we're going to be doing in this panel discussion is talking about using your portfolio or buying property and investing in property with an eye on retirement. And we're going to be talking to Mary-Ann and Sue about their strategies for retirement. So I want to start by asking you, and I've got these slides just to summarise some of the points that I'm hoping we're going to discuss. Sue, can you just tell us first of all a little bit about your property business, whether you run any other businesses, what your sort of goals and values are, just to give listeners an idea of what it is you're up to?
Yes, so I run a diverse portfolio in partnership with my husband, and we have probably tried every strategy under the sun, from HMOs, student lets, buy-to-let, development, and even taking one of our larger residential properties out of the private rented sector because of the Section 24 tax problems, and turning it into a holiday let as well. So I think I'm lucky enough to live in Worthing, some may not, but down by the sea. So that has been a very good move for us to run it as a business. In addition to that, I'm a fellow rep with Richard for the Nrla. I also work for their training department, and I have my own training company, and I specialise in delivering tax courses. And,
yes, and we should say, Sue, that you are going to give us some ideas around tax, but you don't give specific tax advice. It's tax ideas that people can then go off and do some research on. So just to be clear on that. Yes,
it's about educating, teaching people thoroughly the tax system, what's possible, and also empower them with the tools and the tricks of the trade that I show, because all my work is copyrighted, to enable people to start unpicking and being in an advanced position to make their own choices and to seek the proper advice. Yeah, so that's where I am. And just to finish off, I also teach a couple of days a week. Always keeps me on my toes. So yeah, but very diverse, but busy. So those are how I spend my time.
So you're a portfolio landlord with a portfolio career. And let me bring in Mary-Ann Richmond-Coggan. Now, Mary-Ann, you also have a holiday let, don't you? Can you tell us a little bit about your property business and other businesses that you run?
Well, I started off over 30 years ago having lodgers. That's how I started. I've been doing property ever since. And I actually semi-retired at the age of 39 from BT, took voluntary redundancy and had enough to live on. From just having 3 or 4 properties at the time. So for me, it was about independence initially. It was having properties, and I used to like run down places where nobody wanted to live, like Dulwich and Forest Hill and stuff like that, and doing them up. And I've always loved doing things up and seeing the potential. So I have to enjoy all the properties I have. I don't do anything just to make money. It has to be something that I really enjoy.
Great. And can you tell us a bit, Mary-Ann, about what your thinking was about retirement? Because I know you've set up a charitable trust, and you now run Green Farm as well. And so you've really kind of developed and evolved your business so that you're thinking about how it takes you into the future and into retirement, haven't you? Can you tell us a bit about that?
I think primarily the properties were what gave me the independence to choose what I did. So from there, I bought a big project, and I now sort of have holiday lets. I run retreats. I have a spa. I do a variety of things all around well-being and being in the countryside. But the whole passion is about sharing that with people that wouldn't normally have access
to the countryside and to those sort of elements that help with well-being. So ultimately my goal is everything is going to be left to the charity. So it's a very different position from a lot of people. So the properties is just one part of that, and that's the bit that is the sort of almost like the regular income that it's given me over the years, and that's enabled me to make different choices than perhaps I wouldn't have done if I hadn't have had the properties. But funnily enough, having worked for BT, who had one, and still I never ever thought about the pension giving me the lifestyle that I wanted. It was always going to be the properties, and by accident, having been there at 12 years, I realised I had quite a good pension as well from BT. So my mission along the way was being independent, having my own income, and being, you know, and actually always being comfortable enough to have the freedom to do what I wanted to do. So that was the driver probably 30 years ago now.
Great. So you've got the best of both worlds there, because you have got your BT pension, but also your properties are your pension. And very interesting to hear how you're running a kind of values-driven business, and you've set up a charity that runs things like a community garden, and that you intend to leave all your properties to the charity. Is that the idea?
I think that's my intention. That's a little bit, you know, whether we give everything to that, but I think I'd like the idea of it because it's an income stream. So my real passion is to make sure that having a charity doesn't mean it's a burden. So I want everything to be able to pay for itself, and to sort of almost having a social conscience, but still realizing you need to pay the bills, and then you can make your own choices. So that's what we're trying to create, and create a culture of that it doesn't, earning money isn't a bad thing. It can, if it's done with a sort of principle and a value, then it works for everybody. And I think that works in your rental business generally, because if you're fair and you look after people, that, you know, generally they will look after you.
Yes, absolutely. Let me bring you back in, Sue, because I'm very interested to hear how you're planning to retire, or, you know, how you're planning to evolve your business as you, I'm sure you're many years away from retiring, Sue. And also
yeah, well, I mean, there's no secrets. I'm 57, and I'm still enjoying very much a full and diverse working life. But without a doubt, I think the clouds are, you know, gathering, and we have to make some very tricky decisions. So we have 3 grown-up children. I say grown-up, in their 20s. My daughter just got married last month. So we were able to support her and perhaps give them some gifting, and we can talk all about that a little bit later on, and there's a strategy. So you're giving away money, beginning to gift and to move that wealth out of your own pot. It's a really tricky decision to make, because previously I would have said that I thought I wouldn't be thinking along the lines of how to manage that step until a number of years in advance. But I think, to be quite frank, Section 24 has really changed that, because you can't keep remortgaging a property and thinking, well, but when I die, it'll be a debt on my estate, and meanwhile I'll take the cash out and build my portfolio or gift it out of my estate. That has been stopped as a strategy under Section 24, unless, you know, so you're in a position where you're only paying down your properties really to survive in the long run, because it will.
Just to be clear, Sue, so Section 24 is the changes that happened in the budget a few years ago, where we can't now claim finance costs as a business expense at the full 40% or 45% tax rate. You just get a tax credit back of 20%.
Correct.
So and it means that for some landlords they pay a marginal tax rate of 60-65%. It's really quite punitive, isn't it? Can you tell us a little bit more about selling or gifting, Sue? Because presumably if you sell a property, you will pay capital gains tax if it's not your principal residence. And of course, that will be at 18 or 28% on the gain that you make. So that's the difference between the price you bought it for and the price you're selling it for, with some deductions for some expenses. if you're gifting, how do you gift? Because isn't there a kind of 7-year rule around that, or what? Can you explain?
Yes, you can gift. It's a potentially exempt transfer, as long as you live for the full 7 years and clear it out of your estate over those 7 years. But if you were to pop your clogs any period within those 7 years, then there is a declining scale, should I say, that you do end up actually returning to your estate and being charged for it. There are ways around that. You can insure that strategy, so you can insure the property, insure that risk. But gifting also, you need to be careful, because if you gift property, if it's not your main residence, you could also, if you gift it to one of your connected family, you can trigger capital gains tax as well, and that can be a tax trap as well. So as you gift the asset, then you actually will trigger capital gains tax if it's not your main residence. So the 7-year potentially exempt transfer rule works beautifully with your own property, your principal private residence, because you beat inheritance tax, but you are subject to capital gains tax. And that's one of the key things to understand between the two, the status of the asset that you're trying to gift. If you gift away a buy-to-let property, unfortunately, it does trigger capital gains tax, and you could be finding yourself in a tax trap, because if you sell a property and you pay capital gains tax, or you have to pay it, you have the proceeds from the sale in your bank account. But if you gift for no money to your next of kin because you love them so dearly, you could create a tax trap where there's no money to pay the capital gains tax, because you've gifted it, because it's in the asset and the equity that you've gifted away. So just very small amounts of information can really help you decide which assets you're going to use to gift, but also understanding capital gains tax in terms of, there are a lot of tricks that you can play with capital gains tax with the annual exemption allowance. So every year, all of us sat here have 12,300 annual exemption amount to offset against any gain, before, as you quite rightly say, Richard, the expenses and other deductions. One of the tricks that I'm going to probably be using to transfer property across to one of my 2 sons shortly will be to start bringing them onto the title of the property, and possibly the mortgage as well, because you've got to be very tricky when you're planning. If you have good mortgage rates and you can get your next of kin onto the mortgage, it means that if you pop your clogs, they not just inherit the property, but they can inherit the mortgage. And that's really important, because otherwise they have to find their own mortgage or remortgage, and they won't maybe get the same rates that you got. The 12,300 is really important, because over a long period of time, you can use that 12,300 to start gifting the value in the asset up to that amount across each year. So my husband and I own property jointly. We could technically transfer 24,600 across every year, and slowly move an asset out of our ownership and across. So that is one of the strategies that we're looking at. And it's not going to be the answer to everything. It's not going to solve all our problems, but it's a strategy that's very underused by many landlords, and not shared enough by tax advisors and consultants, really.
That's very interesting. Sue, and I want, just before I come back to Marianne, when I was chatting to you a couple of weeks ago, you were talking about making arrangements for care, and it's probably something not many of us like to think about. I forget how much it is. I think it's 86,000 or up to 80 something thousand that we're going to have to spend on our own care arrangements when it changes in a couple of years' time. What sort of thoughts are you having around care? What kind of capital are you trying to set aside, or how are you trying to apportion that?
Well, we will be managing the portfolio now, and that's one of our great concerns, is that we're both reasonably healthy now, and there's 2 of us, but if, say, 2 of us needed care in the future, you've always got that challenge of, if you gift or sell property away to beat the tax man, you actually don't have enough in your older age, or if an ailment hits you earlier, to actually get or pay for the care that you want, not the local authority has given you. What type of care do you want, and would you want to pay for it? So it's a big challenge between trying to make those financial choices and manage the portfolio to avoid tax on death or capital gains tax during your life. And you think, well, I'll keep control. But it's a challenge, isn't it, for all of us? It's crystal ball gazing. How much money will any of us need for care? We can't see into the future. And I think if there's two of you, you know, you might need to keep that more, even though we've got this limit for care. If you want to pay for quality higher care than what is just being offered, then you do need to be in control of your finances. And it's a very tricky path between the two. On the first death, of course, on the first death, maybe of a partnership or a marriage, civil partnership, on the first death, then maybe there's more thought and moving to do for the survivor. But I think it's a really difficult challenge. And because we are both reasonably healthy, because I'm 57, my husband's 61, it is a challenge for us. At what point are we going to want to give away and remove the estate out of the assets out of estate, and accept that we don't have control of the finances or the income anymore?
Yes, that's tricky, because as entrepreneurs, we often want to be in control of things and, you know, running the business as effectively as possible. Let me come on to Marianne again. Marianne, I wanted to ask you about paying down debt. You know, I'm still capital raising against my portfolio for various projects, and I don't know if you've been capital raising to develop your existing businesses, but I'm curious to find out, you know, if your aim is to pay down some of that debt, or indeed if you already have, whether you will ever sell some properties off to pay for others. What are your plans?
I'm expecting eventually to probably sell some to pay off another, but you know, the debt's quite low, really. My loan to value is quite low. So you've benefited from high capital growth, haven't you, across London, because you've invested for many years. So presumably that's been very advantageous for you. Is that right? Yeah, and the last sort of 13, 14 years, I haven't invested in buy-to-let property. So I've diversified in all the other sort of types of business, from farmers to, you know, to holiday let to sort of spa businesses. So, and I have used a little bit of money to help support that. But because I've got that mixture of totally different businesses, obviously quite a lot of it is all involved in property, but there's different sort of structures within it. It did make it a lot easier. For example, you know, when we weren't getting any income from the holiday let, at least we were getting income from rent. So I think having that diversity is really important. So from me, when I look at the big pot, there's quite a lot of capital that I could grab when I decide what I want to actually get rid of or not. That's the ultimate plan. I think I don't feel too worried about it at the moment. But now you have holiday lets, and obviously you're involved in running a charity. I'm just wondering, you know, will there come a time when you will want to just lie in a hammock all day, or or you know, just chill out basically and not work? Are you happy letting other people manage these assets and manage the business? Because I know you're somebody who's very hands-on. I am as well, and I struggle with the idea of handing properties over to letting agents and so on. What are your thoughts on that? I'll probably, because we've got quite a lot of we've got a really good team now, so it's been like a big family business, really. I think my plan is that, you know, as you've done, simplify the process. I don't have huge amounts of property in London. I think it's sort of, you know, probably a member of staff that's also looking after other elements of Green Farm will also help run that. That was one of the questions, you know, do you want to get to the stage where keep it simple but get someone else to manage the property and stuff? So that's the plan, is to get more people to manage everything for us. And I think you've used a SIP, haven't you, which is a way of putting land into a sort of pension pot, haven't you? Yes, is that right? We've got a combination of things. We've got property in SIP, land in SIP. You know, we're obviously doing ISAs and stuff. So we've got a real mixture of different things and pensions and stuff like that.
And obviously that's the sort of thing that people need to talk to their accountant about for more information, but it's definitely worth considering.
We were quite lucky because the bit of land that we did end up building, it was C1, so it meant we could buy a land and do it within a pension, so that really helped.
And also you've been very skillful with the way that you've used planning system and planning applications and worked very closely with your local authority, really to reinvigorate a part of a village that was quite run down.
Yeah, we were very lucky. We got a planning that we probably wouldn't have ever got, but because the councillors could see how much local people and local work what we're bringing, that we employ now. So, and we ran, as you know, the local dog show. So we try and put as much into as we can, and I think it is about the community. So of course that's worked in our favour as well.
Yes. Sue, let me come back to you, and I wanted to ask about this idea of handing over assets to offspring. Many of us started off with humble means and kind of built our businesses up as entrepreneurs. How do you feel about kind of, handing over these sort of golden assets to your sons? Was it your son and your daughter? Sorry.
Yeah, my daughter has already been helped with. I mean, she has a good income as well, but she was helped with the deposit. But I mean, her own income. My two sons, this is a challenge, isn't it? Isn't this a challenge? Yeah, I came from very, meager backgrounds. We took a lot of risks. We lived in the Middle East for many years and grafted to be able to build our portfolio. That's where we got the financial freedom from originally. So we made a lot of tough choices and went without in the early years, even in the choices that we made. So I think it's a really big challenge to then hand other things over on a plate, because you want to see that maturity and that growth and drive as well. At the same time, there's the philosophy that everybody really needs somewhere to lie at night and be safe and put their head down and go to sleep. And you want to provide as well. But these are excruciating challenges. I think my daughter's 29, my younger, like the other sons, are in their earlier 20s, and I think it's too early. But of course, the clock is ticking, my friends. You get this opportunity to gift every 7 years. How many 7 years do I have left? I sit there and look at the clock.
Well, hopefully
not that many.
Are you planning to lie on a beach at some point, and who will manage your properties when you do, or will you have sold them all or gifted them all?
It's very unlikely to find me lying on a beach. Very few and occasional holidays are spent that way. I really, that's a big challenge for us, the HMOs we have with the student lets. I don't want to, our experiences are that we manage them a lot better and solve problems a lot easier, but we do have that challenge that eventually we're not going to be able to do it all. And I think at that stage we'll probably sell, pay the tax, and hopefully reinvest the money in some other long-term, I say long-term, a 10 or 15-year plan for its growth. To hand over to other folk, we've always got the problems of the law of agency, which is that everything a letting agent says or anyone says that manage your property, you've technically said or done, with one or two caveats perhaps around the right to rent. Apart from that, you are responsible for everything that goes on that house. You have a contract with an agent and you may dispute with them, but at the end of the day, your liability will be yours regardless, because they are working for you technically. So,
yes, and the thing is though, Sue, I
mean,
let's imagine you are 88. I think your husband will be 91 or no 92 by then. Are you going to want to have anything to do with your properties then?
I would like to think so, but I've got to be realistic, haven't I? And I just don't know what the next 20 years are going to look like, health-wise, mental-wise, family-wise. And these are big questions. I think I am at the beginning of the curve to starting to make some bigger lifetime decisions. I've spent my life's work over the last 15 years and picking it all for other folk to learn and to share. And I think I'm now challenged myself at those big decisions. And some of them, once you've made those decisions, you can't unravel them. They are made. And to gift or give away something you've built up over so long is a challenge. And as you say, like as Marianne said, that your values aren't always to necessarily feather your own nest.
Yes.
It's to give out as well to community and other folk, and to provide. It's difficult.
Thank you very much, Sue. Shall we have a final word from you, Mary? And how do you retire well and happy?
Well, as I was saying to someone today, just dunking in the pond every day at the moment, and it was very cold this morning, but that makes me quite happy.
Yes, Marianne's got a very large pond, I should say, which is kind of like a lake, isn't it? Yes. Okay, well, Marianne Richmond-Coggan and Sue Bryer, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I hope you found that useful, everybody. And obviously do seek further advice from your accountant, or Sue Bryer does run a tax course, which I think you still run for the NRLA, do you, Sue? Or
no, it's I work for I do other training for the NRLA. No, I have a Sue Bryer landlord tax training. I have a course coming up next week actually on the 7th. But yes, everything there's templates to help people. That's what I do now. Yeah.
So do Google that if you're interested. And Sue's a very good trainer. Thank you very much, Sue and Marianne. We'll move on now to our next presentation, and we're going to hear from Karen Shaw, who's Head of Housing Needs, on developing an approach to prevention and early intervention around homelessness. So over to you, Karen. Karen, are you with us? Hello, Karen, are you there? Oh. Have we lost Karen? It looks like we might have lost Karen.
Let's just call her in and see if we can.
Yeah, I'm just trying to call her now.
Right.
Connection might have dropped off.
If I'll wait a few seconds, and if not, I will go on to the next item, and then we can bring Karen in next. Just see if it looks like we're going to hear from her. I'll just sort out my presentation. Shall I think I'll go on to my item then, and we'll save some time for Karen at the end. Yeah, so we will go on to my presentation now, and oops. Yeah, I'm hoping that we can see my presentation now. There we go. Right, yes, so we're going on to a regulatory briefing now from me, and I'll try and keep this brief to make sure we've got time for Karen afterwards. So let's start off with the impact of the evictions moratorium now. The enforcement ban on evictions ended on the 1st of June 2021, and notice periods were reduced to 4 months, tapering back to pre-COVID levels by today, of course. So the big news is that notice periods in England are back to pre-COVID levels from tomorrow. So it will be a 2-month notice period for Section 21, and the standard pre-COVID notice periods for Section 8. So that's, it's big news for landlords. And I have to tell you that the NRLA were quite involved in trying to encourage the government to bring Section 21 back to 2 months. We were worried that they might leave it at 6 months permanently, but we are where we are now. We're back to 2 months, which is, I think, good news for landlords. I have to tell you that Wales and Scotland are not doing the same. They have kept extended periods, and if you have properties in those areas, and there is information on the NRLA website. Now 800,000 in the private sector housings in the PRS had built up arrears since March 2020. This is NRLA research, and what we found that 82% had not been in arrears prior to the lockdown. So a massive number of those had actually developed arrears during the various lockdowns. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation were claiming that 440,000 tenants were at risk of eviction when evictions began again from the 1st of June, but I think that was an overstatement. And NRLA research had suggested that landlords and tenants were negotiating quite successfully. One of the debt charities, Step Change, is saying that they believe about 20,000 people are in serious arrears, and Landlord Action has said that their caseload has gone up by 43%. And they help landlords with evictions. The biggest case that they're working on is arrears of 144,000. Could you believe it? My goodness. And there are some cases where tenants just have simply stopped paying during the COVID period and really taken advantage. There's a small number of tenants that have done that, of course, and most tenants have wanted to work with their landlord. The courts are clogged up. 60% of claims are still unheard, and the average time is 15 to 18 weeks to actually get a possession order. So, you know, if possible, don't go to court, talk to tenants, try and come to some arrangement with them. Now, the rental reform white paper, this is the next stage in the renters reform bill. The government didn't actually mention that they were going to bring forward a renters reform bill in the Queen's speech, but they did say that they would be publishing a consultation response on abolishing Section 21, and they said they were committed to doing that. They were going to outline proposals for a new lifetime tenancy deposit. So the idea of that is that tenants would pay a deposit to one landlord, and when they moved to another landlord, the deposit would move from that landlord to the other one. Now, we're not sure how that's going to work because, of course, sometimes we need to keep the deposit and keep some of it before we can return it. And currently we have 10 days to do that. And if a tenant just moves from one property to another on the same day, then how can the deposit just be handed straight over? So we're all a bit bewildered as to how that's going to happen, and we're waiting for the government to suggest what they think would work. Now, they are due to publish a white paper in the autumn. Of course, we're in the middle of autumn now, detailing the reform package. They also say they're going to include a mandatory redress scheme for landlords. That's similar to the redress scheme that agents have to be part of. But we are hearing there's going to be a delay, and I don't honestly think we're going to see a white paper until the spring. And in fact, it's interesting with the new Secretary of State, you know, I do wonder what will happen. And, you know, I would love for the renters reform bill to not happen, or for the abolition of Section 21 to not happen, if I'm honest. And I think the NRLA are trying to get behind the idea of abolishing Section 21, but until the courts are reformed, I think it's very difficult to see how it will work well. Now, the government also said they will bring forward reforms to drive improvements in standards without really outlining that, but they did mention the possibility of a register. This came completely out of the blue, so that would be a register of rented properties in England. And of course, if they did that, does that mean that they would abolish local authority licensing? Would it be replaced with a register? Who knows? So, you know, it's all very vague at the moment, and really we're waiting for some more specific information. Of course, the renters reform bill, what that would mean for you is that you would really need to think about how you've used Section 21 in the past, because you would be faced with tenants who would have the right to a lifelong tenancy in your property, unless you got a court order to evict them, or unless, of course, they leave. Think about how you need to adapt to your business going forward. Of course, tenant selection will be key. So if you don't already do proper referencing and credit checks, etc., you know, make sure you're doing that now. You should be doing it anyway, and you should certainly you will really need to be sure that you get the right tenant in future. Certain tenant groups could suffer. So, for example, tenants on benefits, who we know are more likely to fall into arrears. Landlords could be less likely to take tenants on benefits. There could be implications for the student sector, because, of course, normally students stay for 9 months or 12 months. In London, it's a bit more flexible, but in university towns like Leeds and Loughborough and so on, 9 months is the norm. But of course, if Section 21 is abolished, then students will also have the right to stay for life. And, you know, the student housing sector can't really work in that way. So we don't really know how that will work. And it could be the last straw for some landlords. It could mean a bit of a sell-off in a smaller private rented sector. Just moving on now to Hmos and saying a little bit about that, just to add on to what Shmol said, really. Now, the government conducted a consultation on Hmos, which ended on the 30th of December 2020. And what they proposed was that the minimum EPC would be C for rented properties by April 25 for new tenancies and by April 2020 for existing tenancies. I should add that we don't know that it would be April in those years. We don't know that it's going to be those years because we're still waiting for the response. We are expecting a response later on this year. Of course, you know, there's lots of other stuff going on like COVID, there's going to be a budget and so on. but we should be getting a response soon. The cost cap would be £10,000. So the idea is that you wouldn't have to spend more than £10,000 to try and get your property up to C. And we expect around about 10% of privately rented properties to be exempt. My main concern is that a lot of Victorian terrace properties will need external insulation to bring them up to a C, and I just can't see us cladding rows and rows of Victorian houses. So I'm a bit puzzled as to how we're going to get there, but that all that remains to be seen. 67% of properties in the private rented sector are D or lower, amazingly. So a lot of properties will be affected. I've done a list of all of my properties and all of the EPCs, and I started to make a plan as to what sort of improvements would need to be made. Do take advantage of grants. I understand that Redbridge has a grant available. These are often fabric first, so you have to do things like improve insulation rather than change boilers, etc. But it depends on the scheme, and they can sometimes be targeted at low-income households. Just to mention the building safety bill, this was in the Queen's speech. Developers will have to join a new homes ombudsman scheme, and obviously a lot of this is driven by what happened at Grenfell. Residents are to have more say in the management of buildings. Building owners will be responsible for managing safety risks for the lifetime of the property, so they can't just build a property and then walk away, and there will be criminal sanctions if there are failures, the sorts of failures that we saw at Grenfell, of course. There's going to be a building safety regulator. There will be 6 to 15 years you'll be able to claim compensation for substandard work for up to 15 years, and it will also apply retrospectively. Previously, that was 6 years. And there's going to be a national regulator for construction products as well, and that's to make sure that we don't have combustible cladding like the ACM type cladding that was used at Grenfell. Other bills in this Parliament, well, just to mention that the MHCLG, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, is now the DLUHC, so the Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. So levelling up has been kind of shoehorned in there, and there's a new Secretary of State, Michael Gove, although the minister responsible for the private rented sector remains the same. Interesting that the planning bill that was due to go through, which was going to create zones where developers could have free rein really to build houses without the local authority having a lot of say, that has been put on a hold by Michael Gove, and that's what makes me wonder really, because he's quite a right winger. I'm not sure if he would go for the abolition of Section 21, but this is just me speculating. It's not the NRLA's view or anything like that, but I think it's a question of watch this space. There's also the Leasehold Reform ground rents bill, which is going to go through, and that's around these extortionate ground rents that some properties, what would seemingly be freehold properties that have been deemed leasehold and are having to pay ground rents, that new developers have been creating. So that's aiming to reform that. And also, just to mention, I'm sure you're aware of this anyway, that universal credit is returning to its pre-COVID level from October, and it will be £20 per week lower, which is going to have a significant impact on lots of claimants, of course. So on right to rent, well, the temporary adjustments, which were extended to the end of August, have been extended again until the 5th of April 2022. So you can scan passports and send them by email or make contact with tenants by video, and also follow-up checks on people who have a limited right to rent are not required. Oh, sorry, follow-up checks if you previously only saw scans and had video contacts with tenants. You don't have to do a physical face-to-face follow-up check. So you can basically do right to rent checks remotely until the 5th of April now. There have been some changes. So from the 1st of July 2021, in order for people to have a permanent right to rent, people from EU countries will need to provide a residence card or evidence of settled status in the UK. So that's people of EU nationalities. Other EEA countries or Swiss nationals will just need to provide a residence card, because of course they can't have settled status. There's an online portal to prove settled status, so you can go in there and put in the tenant's details, or they can, and come up with a digital certificate. It's not required for Irish nationals, so Irish nationals live within the common area, common travel area, and they don't need to show any settled status. Now, for temporary right to rent, EEA or Swiss nationals would need to provide a passport and proof of entry in the last 12 months. So that could be something like a boarding pass or something that shows that the person came into the UK in the last 12 months, and that would give them the temporary right to rent for up to 12 months. And then you'd need to check again after the 12 months. There is the government's landlord checking service. If you Google right to rent, you can see that, and you can go on there and check online or phone the department if you've got any difficulties. Now, finishing off with a look at what's happening with the market. I'm going to be writing a piece for Property Investor News on the end of the moratorium on evictions and how that's panned out. And also I'm going to be including part of the article on reasons to be cheerful. We are celebrating 25 years of buy-to-let mortgages. They started in 1996 when Nrla persuaded some lenders like Mortgage Express, which was part of Bradford and Bingley, to offer buy-to-let mortgages. And of course, we've come a long way since then, and the market has expanded. And in fact, the private rented sector was just 9% in 1992, and it's 20% now in 2021. And buy-to-let mortgages reached a peak of around about 20% in the middle of the last decade. So reasons to be cheerful. Well, the UK economy is the strongest economy in the G7 in terms of economic recovery at the moment. And in fact, we've just heard that in Q2, growth went up by 5.5%. It's been revised up from 4.8%. So the recovery is quite strong at the moment in the UK. Mortgage interest rates are at the lowest ever, really. I mean, I'm just switching one of my mortgages in Ilford, actually, on one of my Ilford properties to 1.25%. That's a Coventry product. You know, it's incredible. I've never been able to get a buy-to-let that cheap. And mortgage availability is good. On the whole, lenders want to lend to us. Rental demand is picking up. 39% of landlords have reported increased demand in the latest Nrla survey. We're seeing the return of international students. There doesn't seem to have been any obvious Brexit impact because, of course, we've lost a lot of particularly Eastern Europeans who lived in East London. You know, quite a lot went back because of COVID. But we're getting migrants, of course, now from Afghanistan and from Hong Kong. And, you know, the rental market seems to be becoming more and more buoyant. House prices are still rising and the sales market is buoyant. So the latest land registry figures, which are the 12 months to July 2021, prices are up by 8% across the UK, 2.2% in London. In the previous 12 months to June, prices were up 13.2% across the UK and 6.3% across London. And you can see the change because, of course, the stamp duty holiday ended at the end of June. And the land registry says that prices fell 3.7% from June to July. So you can see the kind of major impact there of the stamp duty holiday. There are some clouds on the horizon. There's no doubt that the abolition of Section 21 is a cause of concern. People feel that there's an increase in regulation, burdens and restrictions of licensing, and particularly Article 4s in East London, and the cost of new measures. I mean, I've spent several £1,000s on electrical safety certificates over the last couple of years, replacing consumer boxes and so on. Of course, you could argue that's a good thing because it's making the properties safer, and I've got good cash flow and I set money aside for those sorts of improvements. But you know, some landlords may be struggling to do that and may be frustrated at the amount of regulation. I'm frustrated about the Hmos regulations, I have to tell you. I think we're looking at professional compliant landlords in future who will be well placed to absorb the business from exiting smaller landlords. Sorry, I think it should be double T on exiting there. There is a lot of uncertainty around the Renters Reform Bill, of course, and the register's been hinted at. So, you know, it's difficult to know what's happening and difficult to plan. And of course, if you are developing properties, then there's a lot of uncertainty around planning reform. I finish here on whether to buy, sell or hold, and I try and have a slide on this every time now because I know people are interested. Landlord optimism in our own businesses has dipped slightly from 44 to 41 on the NRLA index. It was in the 50s and 60s in the middle of the last decade, so it's a bit better than it was, but it's still not great. 14% of landlords say they're planning to expand in the next 12 months. 20% say they're planning to reduce their portfolio. So, you know, the anecdotal evidence that a lot of landlords are selling up is in many ways true. Reasons to buy was certainly the low cost of borrowing, incredible at the moment. I'm just going to do a 5-year fix at 1.69% with the mortgage works. It's a great time to do that. And the rental market is improving, as I've said. Reasons to hold, well, you know, if there's going to be a smaller, more professional landlord community in future, then maybe it's good to stick around and, you know, expand the business. And rental yields and capital growth are positive at the moment, and have, of course, capital growth has been very positive for the last 10 or 12 years or so. Reasons to sell, well, you could argue that the market is peaking and that, you know, this level of capital growth is unsustainable. And of course, people will argue that regulation, tax and changes to possession reform are other reasons to sell. Oh, it may of course be retirement. We've been talking about that today. Now, finally, just to remind you about the NRLA podcast, do give that a listen if you're interested. It's called Listen Up Landlords. You can just Google that. I present that along with the Chief Executive, Ben Beadle. And also you can look at some of the old NLA podcasts if you go to Inside Property or the NLA podcast, which is on Apple or SoundCloud. And if you'd like to join the NRLA, it's normally £75 by direct debit, but you do get a discount if you use my discount code R59, and just Google join the NRLA, or you can call the advice line number there. You do need to be a member to call the advice line, but you can become a member and then use the advice line straight away if you would like to. So that's the end of my presentation. I wasn't able to see if there are any questions for me there. I don't think there are. So what I will do is hand straight on to Karen Shaw now for our final presentation. And Karen Shaw is Head of Housing Needs, and she's going to be talking about developing an approach to prevention and early intervention around homelessness. So over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry you lost me earlier. Oh, I've got some echo.
Right, you don't. You weren't echoing to me then, Karen, so try again.
Okay, I could hear echo as I was speaking, so hopefully that appears to have gone now. Yeah, I've lost my background as well. We're doing well, we're having IT problems. Let me see if I can call up my presentation. Here we are. Can everyone see that?
Yes, that's great, Karen. We can see that, and you're on slideshow. Fantastic, thanks.
Great. Okay, so hello everyone. My name's Karen Shaw, and I'm the Head of Housing Needs at Redbridge. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about homelessness prevention and early intervention, and hopefully give you a little bit of a flavour of some of the things that we're doing currently at Redbridge around that agenda and how it might be relevant to you as landlords. Not a long presentation, relatively short one, and happy to take any questions either here or remotely afterwards. So I'm just going to run through kind of some broad headlines about our approach, show you some of our data, talk about the key projects we're working on at the moment, and then how it impacts on the private rented sector. So very much around our agenda on homelessness at the moment is a focus on not about dealing with people's homelessness and putting people in temporary accommodation, but actually about trying to intervene in situations as early as we can to prevent people becoming homeless at all. And that's very much where we want to be in terms of working with people. For a whole number of reasons, it's better for the individuals not to get into those situations with all the kind of stress and difficulties that brings for households, but also the cost of temporary accommodation to the authority and the suitability of lots of types of temporary accommodation, particularly the emergency types when we have to put people in things like hotels, is not ideal. So we're trying to develop a whole kind of prevention focused approach to everything that we do around homelessness, and working with families and single people who are at risk of homelessness, trying to get in there, solve problems and provide solutions rather than kind of providing the safety net. So that's a kind of switch in terms of how things might have been dealt with traditionally. And part of the reason for that is a kind of very clear recognition that social housing, which is the kind of route that some households would like in terms of finding kind of housing stability, so being a tenant of the council or a housing association, unfortunately isn't a realistic proposition for many of those that would like to achieve that as their ultimate goal, because there just isn't enough to go round. And when I show you the data in a moment, hopefully it'll illustrate that. So all we're doing is about trying to prevent the need to provide temporary accommodation. And if we are having to place people in temporary accommodation, perhaps because we're not successful in getting in early, and we only find out, for example, that someone's being evicted when they kind of turn up from the court having received a bailiff's warrant, that what we do is we place them for a relatively short period of time, and then we help them to move on to something sustainable. And that sustainable thing is probably in the private rented sector. And that's it. Our alternative options are all about a focus on good quality, well-managed private rented accommodation, either directly through private landlords or through organisations like Capital Letters. And the kind of focal target of our work next year is something called the 700 Homes programme, which is about how we come up with as many good quality, sustainable private options for people and reduce our numbers in temporary accommodation by that amount. Allied to that, there's a really strong agenda around helping people to be self-reliant and to kind of focus on things that make people more self-reliant. And one of those is very much a project that's kind of operating in the council called Think Work. So all about the way we operate with our tenants and collaborate with our tenants, focusing on how we help those that aren't currently in work to get into work as a way of improving their circumstances and helping them to sort of move on and thrive. And that we're working with them in a kind of partnership way. So when we work with households that are at risk of homelessness now, it's all about partnership. Council will do this, but what we expect is that the family will do that. So it's a two-way collaboration. And all of this approach is about a better experience for the customer, but also about getting better outcomes for people that improve their life chances and improving the value for money in terms of what the council's doing and how the council's intervening and the accommodation it's procuring. So that's our approach in a nutshell. And this is the data that shows why we're kind of taking this approach. So at the moment, Redbridge's got over 2,700 households in temporary accommodation, and over 40% of them are placed outside the borough because we haven't been able to secure affordable temporary accommodation. And we use a whole range of different types, from bed and breakfast to hostels that we own and manage ourselves, to properties that we lease or have nightly lets on a kind of arrangement with private sector providers, and things like modular homes that we've developed. We've got a whole range. but there are a percentage that we can't get locally, and obviously that's a challenge sometimes for families. Next bullet point shows you the number of people we're dealing with. So really significant numbers approach us at risk of homelessness every year. So between April and now, we've already had over 1,700 households approach us with issues. Now, some of those will be able to simply help with advice, and others will need to intervene in their circumstances in a range of different ways, including if we can't prevent homelessness by providing some kind of temporary accommodation safety net. But we are very focused on that prevention agenda. So we've already in the first quarter this year intervened to prevent homelessness in 992 cases. The pandemic's had a really significant impact on the way that we've been dealing with people. One of the impacts was that we took over the whole period up to 400 single people who were rough sleeping off the streets and provided them with emergency accommodation and support. And we've been going through a process during the last probably 12 months, having brought people in and made them safe, of helping them to move on. So that's been part of the agenda. But the other thing that we saw was temporary accommodation rising as we were going through the pandemic period, and lots of people who didn't have secure accommodation like the kind of private sector tenancies you have, but were reliant on temporary arrangements like sofa surfing, saw those fall away, and that contributed to the issues around rough sleeping. Nearly 7,500 people on our housing register or waiting list, but to address that need, we only got 235 available council or housing association properties last year. It's usually about 300. We're a borough with a really small housing stock, and people wait a really long time if they're waiting for council housing. And that's one of the reasons that we've really reflected and had conversations with our customers and with our politicians about the fact that the private rented sector and the good quality accommodation that can provide is a way for us to be dealing with people's circumstances and providing them with long-term options, because we just aren't going to do it through our own social stock. And so we've got a kind of change programme with a load of projects, and they fall into two categories: property programme projects and people projects. So on the property side, we're building our relationship with Capital Letters, which is a pan-London company which lots of boroughs are part of, which is a kind of source of accommodation for us, and lots of private landlords lease their properties or offer their properties through Capital Letters, and we get an opportunity to take advantage of the really good property that we get through that route. Procuring our own accommodation in the private rented sector through our relationships that we build with landlords like yourselves. But we've also got a whole range of other projects. The one in the middle, for example, Rolding Homes, is our own property company that we have set up that is buying some accommodation for use to discharge our homeless duty. And then we have a whole range of other projects which are about our relationships with homeless households and those at risk of homelessness. Lots of them are about how we conduct effective assessments with them and come to agreements about how we work. But some of them are focused on things that will be of particular interest to yourselves, like, for example, how we work with them to get employment, how we help people to sustain the tenancies that they've got, how we prevent repeat homelessness. And also, one of the things that we have reflected on, that we are very proactively helping people to find private rented accommodation that's outside Redbridge. and that's particularly focused on those who struggle with affordability issues in Redbridge because of wages and rent levels and levels of local housing allowance. So we are helping those that need it and can afford it to secure accommodation in the borough, and we're helping others to relocate to areas where they can set up home and start to build a future with accommodation that they can properly afford. So, whole range of projects there. And part of the purpose of telling you about those and is to make that link with you as private sector landlords about the things that are important in those projects, that in terms of our relationship with yourselves. So, that we'll be working with customers who might be in your properties to try and help people into employment, because we see that as a key way of helping people to move on with their lives. If there are issues in people's tenancies, if people have got rent arrears, if people are falling out with their neighbours, those kind of things, we'll be working with people to have conversations with landlords like yourselves to try and solve those problems so that people don't lose their home and can be sustained where they are, because that's far better than for everybody all round than things breaking up and people having to go into temporary accommodation. We will be looking to secure property, and our focus is on procuring settled private rented, so assured short hold tenancies, rather than taking lots of property from landlords to use as temporary accommodation. And it will be a mix of accommodation that will be local and further afield. Key will be about it being sustainable and affordable for the people that are going to live in it, because that works best for you and for us, and that it's of good standard and well managed. And partly we'll be doing that as well with our relationship with Capital Letters, who hopefully some of you are also working with and potentially renting your properties through. So that's my presentation. If you've got any queries, that's my details, although I've just noticed I've missed my B out of Redbridge, but I can fix that. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We had a question from Claudette, but it's been answered for us by Shmol, which was about whether Redbridge had an empty homes register, and you do have an empty properties officer who I understand is Kathy Fielding. So that's kathy.fielding@redbridge.gov.uk can help with that. And I was going to ask you, Karen, about whether Redbridge is taking any Afghan refugees from the current scheme, which I believe is for translators and etc., people who have worked with government departments and some local authorities. I mean, you've obviously got a huge amount of work on your plate with those 2,728 households in temporary accommodation already, and I know not all London local authorities have been able to assist. But for any landlords who wanted to help Afghan refugees, is that something that Redbridge is working on as well?
Absolutely. Our authority has given a commitment around assisting people under the ARAP scheme. Initially 2 families, and we are currently trying to source 2 private rented properties for the 2 families that we've agreed to assist. We're actually looking for 2 larger properties, a 3-bed and a 4-bed. The aim will be that we in the Housing Service are procuring those properties, but under the ARAP scheme and the new scheme, there's a whole package of support for the family to help them resettle and deal with some of the issues around trauma and understanding kind of new environment that they're in, and helping them kind of get really set up. And so it's really worthwhile in terms of the work that will go on with those families to assist them. So yes, if anyone's interested in particularly working with that, I'd be really, really pleased to hear from them, particularly if you've got a 3-bed or a 4-bed at the moment that you might be able to make available for me.
Well, one of the issues, Karen, is that often Afghan families are quite big. It's quite typical for people to have 5 or 6 children, and hence people often need larger properties. In fact, I've just recorded a piece on the Nrla podcast, which is called "It's Not Landlords," with the director of Afghan Welcome about some of the schemes. We've talked about the scheme in Wolverhampton, and there's various government support as well that is passed on through local authorities, isn't there? So. If you're interested in helping, then please do get in touch with Karen. Thank you very much, Karen, and I'm very conscious of this huge amount of work you're doing for people in housing needs. So thank you on behalf of all of us as landlords, as taxpayers, as citizens, for all the work that you do. Right, well, look, I think we've come to the end of our evening. I can't see any more questions. I need to let you know that we're planning another Landlord Forum on the 2nd of December. That's Thursday, the 2nd of December, from 7 to 8:30 p.m. So do put that date in your diary, and you'll once we've confirmed it, we will advertise it. It will be advertised on the Nrla website and through Redbridge channels. Thank you so much to all of our speakers this evening, and I think we've had an interesting and varied agenda. It's been and thank you very much for everyone being brief and concise, and lots of facts and information were put across very eloquently. So thank you for that. Thanks to you, Misha, for organising the event, and for all your hard work. Just to remind you that the webinar was recorded, and you will be able to access the recording, and I believe that Misha will be putting the presentations on the website as well. So look out for those on the Landlord Forum section of the housing website. But all that remains to be said from me is thank you very much to everyone for joining us this evening, and I wish you all a very good evening. Thanks very much.
Everyone.
And
Thanks,
goodbye.
Richard. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Thanks, Richard.
Bye-bye.